Good afternoon. Welcome to the Delaware edition of our state webinars exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat, the State of the States report. Before we get started, let me run through some logistics to help make this a good experience for everyone. Attendees have been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to shrink and reopen. You'll see a question section of the control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square. That decouples it from the control panel. Please type your questions and comments in there. We will allow plenty of time for Q&A during and after the presentation. We are recording this webinar and will send the link to everyone who has registered. Please feel free to share this recording with others. So let me now introduce myself, and if we could move the slide forward, Beth. I am Chris Coffin. I am American Farmland Trust's Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. Co-hosting with me is Billy Van Pelt, AFT's Senior Director of External Relations. Next slide, please. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me do a quick introduction. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We started as and remain an agricultural land trust, but that is one small part of our work. We partner with a wide variety of organizations on developing tools to help farmers improve soil health and water quality and mitigate climate change. We also focus on strategies and policies to expand land access opportunities for next generation farmers. Our programming is grounded in research and informs our state and federal policy development and advocacy. And let me turn it over to you, Billy. Before I do, we seem to be having some technical problems with our slides moving forward. So while you are introducing yourself and our guests, there we go. Terrific. So without further ado, Billy, let me turn it over to you. And Billy, you might be muted.
Thank you, Chris. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And look forward to sharing this information with our audience. And the work that we're going to be talking about here was completed in partnership with the NRCS and Conservation Science Partners. We are grateful for their support and collaboration. And now I'd like to introduce a very special guest joining us today. Austin Short, Deputy Secretary of the Delaware Department of Agriculture. Mr. Short has served as Deputy Secretary of Agriculture since 2010. A former state forester, he also heads Delaware's Farmland Preservation Program and planning staff, a staff that has had some remarkable achievements. Welcome, Mr. Short.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Short. We thought we might get started by getting your perspective on farmland conversion. So I'll start with a couple of questions. Why should the people of Delaware care about the loss of farmland?
Well, you know, farming, despite our small size in Delaware, farming is still the #1 industry in our state. You know, it's the backbone of our economy, and obviously in order to have agriculture, you must have land. And our location on the East Coast and our fairly mild climate is great for farming, but it's also great for development. So I think our citizens realize the importance of maintaining the culture of our state and the history of our state and our economy as well, it's important to maintain agriculture and to preserve our farmland. I mean, Delaware only has about 1.25 million acres total to start with in the state for all types of land use. And at one point, we had several 100,000 acres of cropland. And now we're down to just over 500,000 acres of farmland. So, what we have is very precious, and we're working very hard to preserve that for future generations so that we can continue to enjoy the bountiful harvest that we experience here in Delaware today.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Delaware is one of the two top states in addressing the loss of farmland. What do you attribute its success to?
Well, I think over the last, 30 years, we have had a lot of people, both in government and outside government, that are very dedicated to seeing farmland preserved. Delaware wasn't the first state by any means to start a farmland preservation program. A lot of our neighbors, Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, had started one before us, and then we realized the importance of doing the same thing. So we started the program in 1991. We received our first state funding in 1995, and we've been very blessed to have support from all of our governors and all of our legislatures since then, and we've received funding every year, even in lean times. And we've worked closely with our county governments. We've worked closely with USDA NRCS, that you mentioned previously, and other government agencies and nonprofits to help preserve farmland, be it through farmland preservation, the purchase of easements, or working with county governments, through the farmland assessment program to reduce property taxes, as well as obviously trying to encourage the industry itself by keeping industry that's here thriving and trying to bring in new industry as well, because obviously you just can't preserve the land. Farming must still be profitable. So we've worked very hard to help to make sure it remains profitable as well. So I think it's, we joke the Delaware way as, we're small, we need to get along, everybody knows everybody else. And I think agriculture is a prime example of that in Delaware. We've worked together, at all levels of government, industry, nonprofit, to try to make sure that we maintain, our very important industry, which is agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Short. As we'll see when we look at the finding, farmland conversion is still a challenge in Delaware. How can stakeholders help to keep this issue front and center?
Well, I think, again, in a small state like Delaware, you can drive virtually anywhere in the state, and see conversion occurring. Certainly, like any state, there's areas where it's more intense than others, but in a matter of 30 minutes, you can find conversion quite easily, on a significant scale in Delaware. So I think, frankly, being small helps us to keep that front and center to some extent, because you can't help but observe it. But I think also helping to remember the importance of agriculture. I think so often when people talk about maintaining your industries and et cetera, and your jobs, they forget about agriculture. We talk about, IT or automakers or banks or credit card companies or what have you, industry, and that's all important too, and even tourism. But I think we also need to make sure people realize and remember that farming is a vital cog of our economy as well. It's not just old McDonald, if you will, driving around on an old tractor with a few hens and a couple cows. It's a $8 billion industry in the state, and we need to make sure folks remember at all levels of the government the importance of agriculture, not just for our way of life and maintaining our heritage, but also the importance to our economy. And I think that will help to keep the importance of farmland and trying to minimize farmland conversion front and center as well in a small state or even a large state, but certainly in a small state like Delaware.
Thank you for sharing those valuable perspectives. We thank you for your leadership And we also want to recognize the strong leadership of Secretary Skews, who's been a longstanding advocate for farmland protection, not just in Delaware, but at the federal level as well. His advocacy around the Federal Agricultural Conservation Easement Program has been enormously helpful. Please pass along our thanks to him.
Absolutely, Michael. Like I said, he had another commitment today, but you said it very well. Ag preservation is near and dear to Michael's heart. His family's farms are in ag lands preservation, and he cares about it very much, locally and nationally. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Billy. Thank you again for joining us, Mr. Short. We do recognize both the leadership of the Secretary and yourself, and undoubtedly many others in the department with you all who helped to make Delaware such a leader in farmland protection. We hope you can stay with us for the rest of the webinar and can join us for the question and answers and additional perspectives.
Absolutely.
Great. So let's now talk about the findings from our Farms Under Threat report. Today we're focusing on the state of the states, which is the second in this research series. State of the States paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state and documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach for this project that included advanced spatial mapping to identify the threats to agricultural land and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We're using this report to raise public awareness, to inform state and federal policy, and to encourage more direct and permanent agricultural land protection. For those of you who did not join us for our launch events last month, I want to touch very quickly on our national findings. From 2001 to 2016, a period of historically low housing starts, the U.S. converted 11 million acres of agricultural land. That's equal to all the land planted in the United States in 2017 to fruits, nuts, and vegetables. The majority of that conversion was to low density residential land use, a conversion that is not as visible, but poses a significant threat to agriculture nonetheless. More than a third of the land converted was what we have identified as nationally significant land. This is land best suited for intensive food and crop production. Important to note, if we go to the next slide, that Delaware, despite all of its great efforts, remains one of the top most threatened states. And what you see here when you look at Delaware compared to Texas, for instance, that these are states that made it onto this list either because of total acres converted, for which Texas leads the country in the numbers of acres converted. But there are some states that are on this list that are smaller that have a higher percent of land converted. And so that's that percent of conversion is what continues to be worrisome in Delaware. So let's now switch to the website. We're going to dive into data available for Delaware on our new interactive website. And I'm going to be helped today by my colleague Beth Fraser, who is our fabulous website navigator. Let's start with pointing out the tab over here on the right-hand side, the Reports and Data tab. This is where you'll find the fact sheets that describe the methodology behind this project. And if you're interested in getting access to the geospatial data we used, you can make a request from the Geospatial Data Layers tab that you see Beth pointing out right there. So now let's go to the drop-down menu and choose Delaware. Here you see you can find both the spatial data and the policy scorecard. So we're going to start with the spatial data, and we're going to start with land cover and use. We have used multiple national data sets to develop the best available spatial inventory of agricultural land use in the US. You can zoom in on this data layer to identify every type of land use in the state, including land converted to both urban and highly developed land use and low density residential land use. Note that one new feature of our research is that we have spatially, excuse me, identified woodland associated with farms. So all told, in Delaware, we show 519,300 acres of agricultural land, which is 39% of Delaware's land base. This is composed of cropland, pasture land, and woodland associated with farms. So let's go to the PVR index next. To understand not just the quantity, but the quality of land being converted, we created a first ever assessment of agricultural land quality that specifically accounts for productivity, versatility, and resiliency. This PVR index was developed in consultation with a national panel of experts. As you can see from this website, the darker green is the more highly productive, the lighter the green, the lower down on the PVR index it scores. Higher PVR values indicate higher suitability for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. So let's turn now to nationally significant land. We used the PVR index to identify the best land in the country for producing crops, especially human edible food crops. This is land we designated as nationally significant. And in Delaware, it is important to note that a whopping 84% of agricultural land in the state, or about 434,600 acres, is considered nationally significant land. This might be one of the I think it actually might be the highest percentage of any state in the country. Most of this nationally significant land is cropland, but there are 23,000 acres or so of pasture in this category, as well as 16,700 acres of woodland. The last category we want to look at is conversion. As I mentioned earlier, the time period we analyzed was a short one, 2001 to 2016, and one with a deep recession in its midst. We mapped the conversion of agricultural land to two types of land use, urban and highly developed, or UHD, and low density residential land use, or LDR. Urban and highly developed land use includes the traditional culprits in farmland conversion: residential, commercial, and industrial areas in urban locations, but also rural, industrial, and energy production sites. So in this category, you might find oil and gas well pads and solar panel installations as well. This project is the first effort of its kind to quantify the extent of large lot housing on the agricultural land base. Low density residential areas range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses are being built. All told, Delaware converted 31,700 acres of agricultural land, the majority of that, 67%, to LDR. Importantly, our analysis showed that agricultural land in low density residential land use in 2001 was 8 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land use by 2016 than other agricultural land. So we're seeing a real pattern then that it translates, it's a transitional land use that ends up being much more likely to becoming urbanized. So Beth, before I turn it over to Billy, can you take a minute to point out the highlight summary tab? So for those who are interested, this is a terrific 2-page summary that shows the land conversion. It gives statistics about the conversion, what's at stake. We did these so that people would have a very simple state-specific fact sheet that they could hand out and that they could use, both for newsletters, for members of an organization, for farmers, for policymakers. So we hope that you will find that helpful. So let me stop and turn it over to Billy to talk a little bit more on the conversion front.
Thanks, Chris. As we look at this map, I think that what we're seeing here, and Mr. Short touched on it briefly earlier, is that there's a limited amount of land. So if you look at the conversion, Wilmington, highly urbanized area, and then Middletown, and Harrington and Rehoboth Beach and Bethany Beach, what you're seeing is areas that are under development pressure or that are currently urbanized are surrounded by productive, versatile, and resilient soils. So in many ways, this is a very clear illustration of why now is the time to act with smart growth planning principles, such as urban growth boundaries, agricultural zoning, large lot minimums in rural areas, and farmland protection working in concert together. The concern here is, and it's clearly illustrated, is that these cities and communities are in danger of merging together. And this is not unique to Delaware. We're seeing this pattern across the nation. So now is the time to move forward with state policies and local policies that plan for the future of agriculture.
Great, thanks, Billy. Mr. Short, do you want to offer any perspectives on what this spatial data shows to you? Anything in particular?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So, I think those of us here in Delaware, we know that there are certain areas of the state that are under more intense pressure than others, at least from a high density development standpoint. And those are southern Newcastle County, which is up in the Middletown area. It's rapidly grown in the past 20 years. Central Kent, I should say 3 areas. Central Kent County, that's Dover, Smyrna, right in the middle of the state. Although that's not had as much pressure recently as the other 2 areas. And the third area is down in the southeastern part of the state, Rehoboth, Bethany, basically that whole corridor along the coast, where we see, a lot of major subdivisions going in, just because of the proximity to the ocean, very low property tax, and and they're still fairly close to the major cities if they want to take a 2-hour drive and be in DC or Baltimore or what have you. So, and obviously we have a lot of tourists as well that have second homes in that area for the beach. So, and unfortunately, a lot of these same areas, which I think is similar and throughout much of the country, also has some of our best soils. So, it is a struggle to try to protect those lands while it's still feasible, and before they're over, surrounded basically, if you will, to try to protect those lands, and because 1, they are very prime for agriculture, and 2, to try to stop this growth. So, that's an ongoing challenge, and I think it will be a challenge, frankly, as we go forward. And it will take, as Billy alluded to, will take work of not just farmland preservation program, but working with the counties on planning, working at the state level to try to ensure that we keep agriculture in those areas for years to come. But those are, and I'll just lastly say, we in the other parts of the state, while not having the intense development pressure like those 3 areas, we certainly still see the low density development that you referred to earlier, where people were creating farmettes from farms. And while they may not have the number of houses and the amount of traffic that you see along the beach or in Newcastle County, it has a similar result from an agricultural standpoint, because obviously, a 100-acre farm divided into 10-acre farms is not nearly the same productivity, the same sustainability as it was when it was a 100-acre farm. So, I think on a very, in a very small area, Delaware is experiencing a lot of the issues that, much larger states experience, on, perhaps one a more scattered situation in larger states. We see it condensed, here in a small state like us.
Great, thank you. That is very helpful. So let's, in the interest of time, let's move on now to the policy scorecard. Our intention with the scorecard is to highlight effective elements of state policies that address the three main drivers of agricultural land conversion to date: poorly planned development, weak agricultural viability, and the fact that land is most vulnerable when it transfers between generations. While AFT has been at the forefront of federal and state policy development around farm and ranch land retention and protection since our founding, this is our first effort at a comprehensive state policy scorecard. And I want to point out right here that we recognize that there are many policies that are not included in this scorecard that address issues particularly around supporting the business of farming. That and Mr. Short alluded to a little bit of it, and the fact that the industry is hugely important to the economy of Delaware overall, and that there are many things that the department is doing outside of these 6 types of policies that are helping to support the viability of those farm businesses. We chose these ones because they had a direct nexus to the land. We chose policies and programs that at least 10 states had. So there's some things that are not included here that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But let's look at the policies that we did have with the things that we looked at. We looked at the purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs or farmland preservation programs. These are, the voluntary, they're voluntary programs. Landowners sell their development rights and are compensated for those. We looked at land use planning and growth management. We understand that this is both a top-down and a bottoms-up approach, that states can do both, that the importance of local planning and zoning is huge, but that the state has a role in incentivizing and rewarding those that are doing things consistently with state goals. We looked at property tax relief for agricultural land. Every state has some type of property tax special assessment for farms. In Delaware, it's the farmland assessment. Again, providing some amount of preferential treatment for agriculture, recognizing that it requires far less in services than residential land use, which is taxed traditionally higher. We looked at agricultural district programs, and these are programs that combine quite a number of different tools. Ultimately, they are around supporting the business of agriculture and trying to make land use around it hospitable. We looked at farm link programs and state leasing, and these were 2 programs that were focused on land access for farmers and a little bit around generational transfer. Farm link programs are ones where it's a program that seeks to match those who are looking for land, whether that's just starting out in agriculture or expanding their operation, with those typically older farmers or landowners who may be looking to get out of the business of farming, want to be sure that their land stays in agriculture, and are looking for a farmer to work with. And state leasing is looking at those, the availability of state-owned land for agriculture and what are states doing to be trying to promote the use of that land for farming. So let's look then, we're seeing here at how Delaware scores. And thanks to the work of your department, Mr. Short, and your many partners in the state, Delaware is second, and a very, very close second among all 50 states in its total score. It gets the top score on its farmland preservation program and its agricultural preserve districts, and is well above the median on 3 other policies. The only policy it does not get any score for is for FarmLink. So this website allows you to dive into the factors behind the scores, which is what we're going to do right now. You go to the Select the Policy or Program tab, and you'll see in the drop-down menu that you can look at each one of these. So we're going to go to PACE programs. If you look at Delaware's score, for instance, it scored extremely well. There it is, right at the top. It tops all states in per capita spending on farmland protection, and it is an extremely close second to New Jersey for the highest percent of farmland protected. It gets credit for its affirmative covenant to farm as part of its easement deed terms. The only element it lacks in the authority category is the authority to purchase land and fee. Some states do have this authority and have used it to purchase land, especially land that is about to go on the market. They then might purchase the land, protect the land, and resell it to a farmer once protected. Delaware has, and we want to give credit and a shout out to Delaware's Young Farmer Loan Program, because it, through that, is providing a mechanism that is helping in some ways to do that same thing, because what the program provides is a mechanism that allows a farmer to purchase the farm in fee, and in the process protecting it. So it's not clear that really that sort of statutory authority is needed for Delaware. As I should point out here, Beth, if you could scroll down to the bottom of the page, you can see here for each of these scores how we scored, what we gave points for, what's included in a particular category. So we hope that those are useful to help navigate this approach. So let's go to land use planning. Oh, before we do, I just want to point out the importance in this PACE program of leveraging federal dollars. Delaware has done a great job of leveraging federal agricultural conservation easement program dollars. And again, I cannot commend Secretary Skuse enough for his tireless advocacy on behalf of the federal program. I hope that the changes in the 2018 Farm Bill and administrative changes to the program being made by NRCS will enable Delaware to continue to leverage additional federal ACEP-AIL funding in the next few years. So now let's turn to land use planning. Again, you see that Delaware does really well. It does well for requiring comprehensive plans and for providing some support through circuit riders for comprehensive plan development. The highest scoring states in this category have state goals around saving farmland and promoting compact development, and impose penalties at the county and local level for failing to comply with these goals. So let's go quickly to property tax relief. Again, Delaware is quite strong with its farmland assessment program. You'll see here that where it gets a 0 is that it's for land enrolled in the program. We know that land is enrolled in the program. I understand from Mr. Short that that enrollment data is done at the county level. And I think that why we included this category here is to both show that it is valuable to know how many acres are enrolled, and for that reason, we find it valuable for there to be a way to roll up all of that county level data into one state number so that a state can track enrollment in farmland assessment. So let's go to ag districts briefly. In Delaware, these are the agricultural preservation districts. Again, you see Delaware, we commend you so much for being at the top here. The only area where Delaware didn't score any points in this category is you see this protection from public conversion, 0 there. That some states, as part of their district programs, do prohibit the use of eminent domain and or annexation in those in their agricultural districts. Let's look lastly at state leasing, Beth. You'll see here that Delaware, the only place where it scores sort of lower relative to some other states is on the assessment category. Higher scoring states in this particular category have done a comprehensive inventory of state-owned land so that they know what type of land holds, and this includes land that could be fairly urban, it could be very small lots, small acreage, but this can be land that is very important to urban farmers, to young farmers just starting out who don't need much acreage. It can be very important to historically underserved farmers. So we think that having this kind of inventory of what type of land is available and then working to make that land available is important. And then, so going back, the only other thing I would point out is on the Farm Link front. We do think that Delaware has done a great job with its Young Farmer Loan Program. The value to have some kind of public farm linking efforts, we feel, is again to recognize that this generational transfer of land is a point of vulnerability. And the more that we can do to make those connections between farm seekers and those retiring farmers and those older landowners who are looking to sell their land, that making those connections and making that sale or lease of land to a young farmer is an important way to keep land in agriculture. So I hope that was a helpful cruise through the findings. If you have any questions, please write them in. We're going to go back to the PowerPoint. To note that one thing missing from our spatial analysis is the protected agricultural land, because there is not a national comprehensive database focused on agricultural land protection. You will see, though, again, it's not easy to see in any detail, that there is a lot of green in Delaware, which is wonderful to see. We're building this new database now. If you have not heard from us and you hold agricultural conservation easements, please let us know by adding a comment in on the question panel, and we will be in touch with you. So let me pause there, Billy, and let me know if there are any questions.
So I don't have any questions at this point, Chris, but just more observations. I think that what we're seeing here in Delaware is really, and Mr. Short mentioned it earlier, is working with now that the state is doing such a great job, that more effort and we can all lock arms together and work together to get protect more farmland at the local level. at the county level. And I think it's critically important to embed goals for farmland protection in the comprehensive plans of every county and municipality across Delaware. That's to say that we're not protecting everything, but we're planning for the future of agriculture. So that's the comment that I'll make at this point before we go on to the next slide.
Great, thanks. So let's go on to the next slide, and then we'll circle back around and ask final questions toward the end. So back to you, Billy.
Sure. Well, as you can see, time is not on our side in saving our farm and ranch land, which is why American Farmland Trust has just announced a bold goal of doubling the amount of permanently protected farmland by 2040 and reducing the rate of farmland conversion from 2,000 acres a day to 500 acres a day by 2040. Next slide, please. So as you can see, this is our strategy for strengthening our commitment, establishing the National Agricultural Land Network, providing new leadership in key locations. So American Farmland Trust has staff across the nation and regional offices across the nation. We're going to be providing more programmatic support and leadership in key locations that our data and research is informing us on where we need to be. And we're happy to work with our partners in Delaware. Protecting more farmland ourselves. AFT is a land trust. We hold conservation easements when there's not a viable land trust partner in place, or the existing land trust partner is unwilling to accept a donated conservation easement. And we'll also be supporting our partner land trusts as they conserve more farmland. Advocating for stronger state and federal policies. Mr. Short, please consider American Farmland Trust as your partner to provide you with research and supporting documents as we all advocate together for stronger state and federal policies. And finally, promoting research-based decision-making. This is critically important because as we go through the planning process, we know that planning conversations in communities across the nation can be somewhat polarizing, but when the decisions are based on research and data, it really minimizes the amount of polarization, because we're in fact basing these decisions, recommendations, and the comprehensive plans that are being adopted on research, and these are not arbitrary decisions. Next slide. So what more can Delaware do? We encourage you to analyze and map agricultural land trends and conditions, strengthen or adopt a coordinated suite of policies. So we talked about the tools in the toolkit, urban growth boundaries for local governments in their urban areas, large lot minimums in rural areas, agricultural zoning in rural areas, and farmland protection. Supporting farm viability and access to land, planning for agriculture, not just around it, and saving the best but not forgetting the rest. So that is what we can do, to what Delaware can do, and what you can do in conjunction with partnering with American Farmland Trust. We are here for you. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Great, thank you so much, Billy. There is a question which is around the distinction between a state's best land and nationally significant land. And you may have seen that as we were cruising through the spatial data, that there's reference about the state's best land. And that is when we created the PVR index, we basically took the top half of a state's, the top range of that PVR index, and said that that was the state's best land or better land. And so it's probably about half of the agricultural land in Delaware as it is in every state. The nationally significant land was any agricultural land that was above 0.43 on our PVR index. And so in Delaware, you'll see that because Delaware is unusual in having such a fantastic resource of some of the best lands in the country, that there is more nationally significant land than what we called Delaware's best land. And that's just because of the way that we have used that PVR index. So, Mr. Short, I thought that one question I would ask you, and we'd also welcome any other perspectives from you on the policy side, but one question for you is, what do you see as gaps for planning for the future of agriculture, and how can our findings help you to fill those gaps at the state level? Are there, and I guess I would ask, are there policy arenas that you think Delaware should be doing more of, or is it just continuing to press on and do what you're doing?
Well, I mean, I think a couple items. I think your findings about AgLink, I mean, that's something we've kicked around in the past, but we haven't done anything yet, obviously, other than the Young Farmers Program. But I think we have room to grow there and improve. Would certainly be one item. And I think a second one is sort of your second point is just keep plugging on and doing what we're doing. I mean, it's we try to get $10 million in state funding every year. We're supposed to, but obviously in tough budget years like one that's probably coming up soon, we may not always get the full 10 million. So whatever we can do to continue to show the importance of farmland preservation, how it pays off for everyone, not just for the landowner or the farmer who's getting a payment for selling the development rights, but how preserving that land benefits everyone, all Delaware citizens. It's a good return on their investment, I think is worthwhile as well as we go forward. And, we always, a third thing I would mention is, we continue to work with the counties. Of course, we only have 3 counties in Delaware, but, trying to work with them to some of your points about incorporating, specifics about farmland, preserving, a certain percentage of farms in each county as we go forward, being part of their comprehensive plan. That's certainly a worthwhile goal as well. So, I mean, while we've been very successful in many facets of preserving farms and protecting farms, there's certainly still more we can do and continue to do.
Great. Well, thank you. And again, we are very impressed at all that you have been doing. So, and obviously any way that we can help going forward, we would be delighted to do so, as Billy said. So let me close it out by talking about a couple of resources available from American Farmland Trust. The first is our Farmland Information Center. This is a collaboration with USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service. We've done this for quite a long time. It is a wonderful web-based resource. You see that farmlandinfo.org that has a multitude of resources, both around land access programs, farmland protection programs, planning and zoning tools. You can find state policies there. You can also find a wealth of statistics around both the Census of Agriculture, around the NRI, around any number of other, there's a lot of information about non-operating landowners, including a recent survey that we have done of those operators, which is quite enlightening. So there's also an 800 number if folks have a question. This holds true for farmers as well as service providers, as well as public agency folks. You are welcome to call that number and people actually answer it. So that's resource number one. The second one is the National Agricultural Land Network, and this is something that we have just launched and that I'm directing. The purpose of this network is to build the collective capacity of those who are working around agricultural land protection and planning to be able to do more. We have always provided a certain amount of peer networking and information sharing amongst professionals, both on the public farmland protection programs and with land trusts doing this. And we want to continue to do more. So we're hoping to elevate the conversations to allow for information sharing around new tools and strategies on both the planning side and the protection side, how you link these efforts, how you make the case for things like farmland protection in the context of climate change mitigation, how we think about integrating farmland protection and access to land and new tools around that. So we also want to build the capacity of those who are just entering into this arena, and might be a land trust that has not focused on farmland protection before, but wants to do that. And we want to be there to help provide information on that front. The network is free. It is open to entities, again, that do this kind of work on the planning or the protection side. This could be state agencies or county planners or land trusts, soil and water conservation districts, farm bureaus, you name it. So more information is on the website there. You can see it at farmland.org, NALN, or you can reach out to me if you have any questions. So let me end there and turn it back to Billy to close us out.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Mr. Short. I'll just say that, again, Delaware has done an amazing job. When we were looking at the spatial summary, I think it's important to note that the soil in Delaware is the gold standard. You have amazing soils in Delaware, and in many ways, it's a microcosm of everything we're talking about. The low density residential development, which is a form of sprawl, it's an urbanization in transition, and the lack of coordinated planning efforts that you were speaking about, Mr. Short. But one thing that we have to consider in the future, not just in Delaware, but in all of our coastal states, is sea level rise. As we have sea level rise and people move away from the coast, the productive, versatile, and resilient soils that are inland will be under even greater threat. And that is why that creates that sense of urgency in Delaware and other coastal states. So we see Delaware as an amazing opportunity to deploy all of the planning tools that we've talked about. We are here to support you and save those amazing soils that you have there. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Appreciate all your help and support.
Great, terrific. Thank you all very much. Have a great afternoon.
You too.